And just like that, my friends, another year has gone by, and with it being the end of the year, it is time for us movie fans to look at the best and worst that 2023 had to provide for us. And in this video, I won't just be giving you guys what I think are the best movies of 2023, I will be letting you know the movies that most disappointed me in 2023, while also telling you the movies that most surprised me, the ones that I thought were going to be crap, but ended up being pretty good, along with a list of movies I call my guilty pleasures, movies that were called crap by most people, but I actually found enjoyment out of them. That was actually kind of a stacked year for both comic book movies and horror movies, so I've decided to give those their own personal videos coming soon to the channel. And as a reminder, this is just my personal opinion. I am in fact no expert, and I'd love nothing more than to see your list for each one of these categories. So without further ado, let's begin with the best movies of 2023. Starting off at number 10, I have BlackBerry, the movie that was the rise and fall of the cell phone company BlackBerry. I actually had one back in the day. I am a huge sucker for these kind of biographical movies on certain companies, and this one was done really well. The cast in here was fantastic, especially Glenn Howerton playing this just like super angry bald CEO. That was also just a fun trip down memory lane, seeing how much the cell phone industry has changed over the years. Number 9 on my list, I have Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. Now, the interesting thing about this movie is you can call it maybe not the best Mission Impossible, but even an average entry in the Mission Impossible franchise is still one of the best action movies released this year. Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt tackling an AI threat, which you would think is kind of overdone and cliche in Hollywood, Mission Impossible finds a way to make it really exciting. While there was really only one decision in the movie I didn't like, overall as a whole, it's a reminder of why I love the Mission Impossible franchise, and even more surprising, they can continue to bust out great entries. Number 8 on my list, Saw X. I never would have thought the 10th entry in the Saw franchise would become one of my personal favorites, but man, did they knock it out of the park. A movie and franchise that probably gets overlooked a lot just for being looked at as torture porn. I think when you get past all the gore and horror tropes in here, the character study on John Kramer and the ability to turn him as almost into the good guy of this movie was done so well. Number 7 on my list, Guardians of the Galaxy 3. In a year where we were just hit with comic book movie after comic book movie, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was a great reminder of what good character work, strong story, and emotional beats can bring to a comic book film. James Gunn not only went out on a super high note with his trilogy, the emotions he brought out of me with a little raccoon losing his friends, I will be scarred forever, and I thank you for that, James Gunn. Number 6 on my list, Talk to Me. Not only do I appreciate this for being a movie that gives YouTubers a good name and shows that some out there are capable of making great cinema, but it's just original take in the horror genre, which is kind of hard to do nowadays, in telling this story with seeing ghosts, apparitions, and then the horrifying imagery that you're dealt with in the middle of this movie. Wow, was this just a great flick. Number 5 on my list, Oppenheimer. Guys, you have no idea how much this movie blows my mind. Not only did this film, I think, outgross every comic book movie that was released in 2023, but it's a 3-hour long history biopic, and yet it was making money like crazy. That is the power of Christopher Nolan, and even just the film itself. Star-studded cast, fantastic cinematography, a masterclass in pacing, and even an ending that left me more scared than most horror movies this year. Oppenheimer was an experience. From number 4 and up, this became really hard. I was just juggling them up and down and could not set them right, so I might change my mind tomorrow. But starting right now, number 4, I have John Wick 4. This right here has to be the ultimate action movie ever made. Keanu Reeves, at his age, is performing stunts that I don't know how he's capable of, going up and down tremendously long flights of stairs, giving us unbelievable choreographed action scene after action scene, while at the same time matching that level of intensity with a story that feels very satisfying for a character like John Wick. It's not just the best action movie of 2023, it's the best action movie of the last 10-20 years. Number 3 on my list, The Iron Claw. Based on the true story of the Von Erikson brothers, this tragedy was a movie I was not expecting to get as into as I was. Zac Efron blew me away not only with his performance, but the scary transformation transformation he has put his body through and how gigantic he got for this role. While I myself am not the biggest sports fan or even wrestling fan for that matter, this movie really hit. Overall, just being a story about family, brothers, and trauma and the way you go about raising your children, the ending of this movie made me cry harder than anything I had seen this year. It's a movie I watched 2 weeks ago and it still pops into my mind every now and then about just how insane this story was and that it actually happened to a family. I am really hoping Zac Efron gets some sort of Oscar recognition and even just the movie as a whole because it definitely deserves it. Number 2 on my list, Godzilla Minus One. This film completely redefined and changed my entire perception of what Godzilla movies could be. I mentioned in my review I was never that big on Godzilla movies as a whole, always much more of a King Kong fan, but this movie really made me love Godzilla. The story did the impossible and made the human character subplots really interesting, and not just that, the emotional beats that followed. Godzilla himself was a gigantic, scary monster the way he should be, plus the amazing visual effects work that went down in this movie, the way Godzilla used his atomic breath to the theme coming up on screen. This was just an amazing movie I'm glad I decided to check out. But number 1 on my list should be no surprise if you're even familiar with me at all, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Not only will a Spider-Man movie always have a high chance of being number 1 on my list, but if you make a phenomenal Spider-Man story that is all based on Spider-Man tropes, leaning into the common stories that have been placed in every single Spider-Man movie with canon events, beautiful animation that is constantly reshaping the way we see animated movies, Across the Spider-Verse just ended up being my favorite. But now moving on from there, let's go into my list of most surprising movies. These were the films that I thought were just gonna be terrible, that weren't gonna be good at all. The trailers seemed bad. For whatever reason, I had the expectation that I was not gonna enjoy my time with this movie. Number 10 on my list, Kevin Williamson's Sick. This movie was released on Peacock earlier this year, and me just describing the plot to you, a couple of girls who rent a cabin during the pandemic because COVID is on the rise. It seemed like a simple slasher, but just the idea of a COVID slasher movie, that sounded like a disaster waiting to happen, and man, was it awesome. And with Kevin Williamson being the one who wrote this movie, you could almost see it as like a spin-off Scream movie because it has a lot of things in there that you would have seen in Scream films. Don't let the outdated pandemic subplot stop you from seeing this one. Number 9 on my list, Plane. I mean, do I even have to explain myself? Gerard Butler in a movie called just Plane. Oh, I thought this was gonna be one big doo-doo, and turns out it was actually quite thrilling. Revolving around an airline pilot whose plane crash lands in a pretty dangerous country, Gerard Butler must figure out how to get all his passengers safely off this island before they're all gunned down. It ended up being so surprisingly good that they're even greenlit a sequel titled Ship. That is not a joke, that is happening, and I'm just as surprised as you are. Number 8 on my list, Megan. Look, you know me, I tend to promote sometimes a lot of very corny horror movies. I had no idea little robot AI killing Megan would be such a phenomenal hit. Not only was this movie extremely well reviewed, but a lot of people had fun with it, even when I thought that Blumhouse ruined it by censoring this movie down from an R rating to a PG-13 to appease the TikTok crowd. I longed for the days where an evil doll movie had the doll actually moving about, doing some destruction, having a little campy fun with it. I enjoyed Megan for what it was, and now that they have a sequel on the way, curious to where they go with this world. Number 7 on my list, Wonka. You know, I trusted Paul King to give me something wholesome and fun, but still telling me an origin Wonka movie starring Timothée Chalamet was coming out, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it would fail. And yet when I went to go see the movie, it was an actual delight. It was a lot of family fun, and that honestly surprised me. Number 6 on my list, Migration. While I am a big fan of animated movies and I'm always down to check them out, Illumination has always been up and down with me. And Migration ended up being one of my favorites that they ever created, mainly because they avoided doing a lot of stuff that happens in Illumination movies, like throwing in pop songs, pop culture references, lowbrow humor like fart jokes. Instead, Migration leaned into the family subplot, created funny characters, a pretty heartwarming, endearing story. I think this will be a hidden gem for them. Bringing me to my number 5th most surprising movie, the Mario movie. We all remember the cries heard around the world when we heard Illumination was making the Mario film. Even worse when we saw the voice cast and it was Chris Pratt. Oh, it seemed like this movie was just doomed to fail, and man, did it turn out to be a lot of fun. While it still got critically bashed, I think people who grew up with Mario, playing those games, enjoying those characters, walked away extremely happy with this movie, and well, that was surprising. Number 4 on my list, Thanksgiving. Even myself had my reservations and doubt that this would be any fun. We knew that it was based off a Grindhouse trailer, and they casted TikTok star Addison Rae. We knew this thing was gonna fail, right? And oh, it turned out to be one of the best slashers of this year, embracing every trope in the genre and playing it out in a fun way. It stuck to an R rating, making a lot of the takedowns in the movie really fun to watch. It added in the whodunit factor, letting you guess who might be behind the mask. Eli Roth actually created something I'm excited to see what they do with in the second movie. Number 3 on my list, Saw X. I had told you, I had lost faith in the Saw franchise. I wasn't even excited when they announced Saw X. I even kind of rolled my eyes when I heard that they'd bring John Kramer back for another time. I'm like, boy, this guy died 20 movies ago. How are you still gonna milk him? And milk them they did in a great way. Wow, was this such a pleasant, fun ride. And after just 3 lackluster sequels, they found a way to get me back into this world, and that honestly shocked me. Number 2 on my list, Dungeons and Dragons. Not a Dungeons and Dragons guy. All the trailers seem corny, dumb. I thought it was going to be filled with what people call nowadays MCU cheesy cringe humor, but boy was it actually a lot of fun. The characters were interesting. The world they built up was actually immersive and fun to get into. It's so sad that this movie kind of underperformed, but hopefully there's enough positive buzz where they give it a sequel, because I'd love to see 3 more of these. But number 1 most surprising movie that I think none of us saw coming, Godzilla Minus One. Think of all the YouTubers right now making top 10 videos and how Godzilla Minus One is probably on every single one of those people's list. We didn't know that would happen, but man, that was the power and strength of Godzilla Minus One. I wasn't expecting it to be one of my favorite movies of this year, but it did. Now, before moving on to my most disappointing movies of this year, moving on to my guilty pleasure movies. These are the movies that you right now watching probably hate, probably don't like. These films basically got bad reviews, but hey, when I watched it, I kind of enjoyed it. Not gonna say I love these movies, but I wouldn't mind watching them again. Number 10 on my list, Aquaman 2. Nowadays, everybody wants every comic book movie to be the best thing that they've ever seen, and that's just gonna be really impossible. Sometimes you get just a campy, fun adventure movie with a couple of good chuckles along the way. James Wan as a director really helped elevate my enjoyment of this movie with his unique, stunning visuals along with awesome action scenes. Of course, I'm not a big fan of some of the story elements, and most people will dislike it because of a certain cast member in here, but I think this is a good enough sequel that you can pair up with the first movie and enjoy them back to back. Number 9 on the list, I saw a lot of hate for this movie, The Haunted Mansion. I was never the biggest Haunted Mansion fan either of the Disney ride or the Eddie Murphy movie, but this movie I actually quite enjoyed. I thought they did a great job in setting up a reasoning for why these characters were stuck inside the Haunted Mansion. Lakeith Stanfield showed that he was maybe too good for this movie because his performance and his backstory as a character I thought was done well. The biggest thing I dislike about this movie is all the verbal product placement, because every 30 seconds they're saying the words CVS, Home Depot, Zillow, and I'm like, Disney, is this what paid for that movie? Number 8 on my list, Stephen King's The Boogeyman. When looking at the reviews, this movie is right on the edge of being rotten in both critical and audience score, letting me know not a lot of people enjoyed this. But for a PG-13 horror movie, this would be one of those films I'd add to examples that PG-13 horror is capable of good stuff. I thought the backstory involved with the Boogeyman was interesting. There's a couple of sequences in here with lights and shadows that I thought worked really well. I thought it was a decent horror movie this year, but not a lot of people felt that same way. Number 7 on my list, can't say the actual title, but White Powder Sugar Bear. Another movie that's really close to being rotten both critically and audience-wise. I thought this was fun, based on the true story of a bear finding a pound of white powdered sugar, sniffing it up, and just going on a rampage. This was a comedy goldmine to me. Number 6 on my list, the Mario movie. Us gamers are the only ones who seem to like the Mario movie. Right now, sporting a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes, this movie was just bashed for for its over silly tone, leaving a lot of those unknown to the video games wondering what's happening in this world. I think Illumination knocked it out of the park and really catered to the fans of this universe, which I think will be the new trend for future video game adaptations. No longer will they try to please the general audiences, but instead just give the fans what they want. Number 5 on my list, Cobweb. This is basically The Malignant of 2023, a movie following a kid who feels there's a dark secret lurking in his house and is surprised by what he discovers. I love the ambience of this movie. It sets you up really well for the Halloween season. While some people feel like the twist or the ending of the movie gets very cheesy, odd, and dumb, I absolutely loved it. It has the makings for what could have been a cult classic, but I think not enough people gave it a chance. I'm gonna say if you're someone who ended up loving Malignant like me, you'll probably end up liking Cobweb. Number 4 on my list, Fast X. I've always been a big defender of the Fast and Furious franchise. I'm down to see this series, and now we're reaching the end of it. Fast X brought me back into getting into this franchise when the last movie really knocked my hopes and made me think I was kind of done with this series. Even more surprising was the post-credits scene featuring a certain character that said he would never return to this franchise. He's back! The hierarchy of power in the Fast Car universe was about to change, and I dug it. Number 3 on my list, Transformers Rise of the Beast. This was a movie that didn't get the best reviews, and while I admit it's not the strongest Transformers movie out there, it was one I had a lot of fun with. I loved the inclusion of the Maximals. The villain in here finally felt like a big threat who wasn't Megatron. Pete Davidson added a lot of humor to the film. While the visuals definitely do not compare to like the Michael Bay movies, story-wise I feel like this is a good direction to head, and even more if they stay true to that post-credit scene, which I'm like, when are we going to hear more news about that? Number 2 on my list, the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Another movie where it's like, just for the gamers, just for the fans. I'll be 100% honest with you guys that if I didn't spend my years of research when this movie got announced 7 years ago, and I was just a casual goer into this movie, I probably would walk out disliking this film. This movie really required you to have some knowledge of the Five Nights at Freddy's world, and if you did, you only benefited when watching this movie. You got the Easter eggs, you got the reference. That Springlock sing in live action was actually kind of enjoyable. Well, I wish they maybe didn't go with the PG-13 route and went R, along with at least fleshing out the story a little bit more so casual moviegoers can enjoy it. I still walked away pretty excited to see what they'll do with the next one, but I am also fully understanding why there's a large amount of people that just dislike this movie, and heck, this movie ends up on a lot of people's worst list of this year, and that's kind of sad. But number 1 on my list of guilty pleasures, The Flash. I'm not gonna let peer pressure succumb to me and have you guys trick me into thinking this was a bad movie, because I really liked it. And I feel like that's sometimes hard for some people to say, separating the art from the artist. I am not a supporter of Ezra Miller, and I do think a lot of the behind the scenes of this movie really ruined what could have been a fun adventure film, like figuring out if this universe was getting rebooted or not rebooted, change this ending, remove this cameo. Yes, that kind of stuff definitely hurt the ending of the movie, but just looking at it as a story, it's a fun Flash movie. It's one I really like. The visuals are definitely something else. But I think 10, 20 years down the line, when no one remembers the controversies involved with this movie, kids growing up watching this film for the first time are going to fall in love with the Flash and have Barry Allen be one of their favorite superheroes. But at the same time, I'm not going to argue with anybody who dislikes this film or doesn't want to support it because, hey, yeah, it's not worth it. Bringing me now to my most disappointing movies of 2023. These were films I was really looking forward to, eagerly counting down the days for the movie, and then when I saw it, boy did my heart sink down and was I just filled with disappointment. Number 10 on my list, Spy Kids Armageddon. I shouldn't have expected much from a new Spy Kids movie, but having Robert Rodriguez, the original director of Spy Kids, return, having the finance of Netflix by your side, I thought maybe this would be a lot of fun and could bring me back into why I'd like Spy Kids as a kid, but it really kind of felt like a soulless rehash of the first 3 Spy Kids movies. Number 9 on my list, Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania. Well, I'm not gonna say I hate this film like a lot of people. It was a disappointment. This was the movie that was supposed to reveal to us why Kang the Conqueror was gonna be the big bad deserving of his own Avenger film, and well, it's not gonna happen now. There's rumors that Kevin Feige, even after the reception of this movie, decided that it was best to move away from Kang even before his legal issues. I also feel like they stopped being inventive with a lot of Ant-Man's powers and wanting to do something unique and different, and just kind of gave us a bunch of the same old. Number 8 on my list, Strays. Now, while I didn't have the highest hope for this comedy, I am a dog owner, and thus I'm gonna end up watching these dog talking movies. And a rated R dark comedy with Will Ferrell and Jamie Foxx, I thought this thing would be my jam, and man was I disappointed. I was so grossed out, disgusted, and just almost annoyed with this movie. And I wanted to like this movie as a dog owner. Number 7 on my list, the Winnie the Pooh horror movie. Now, I obviously didn't have the highest expectations for this movie, but I did at least have some hope that it would be entertaining, that it would be fun, bad, but when you go see it, man, did the movie just take itself too seriously. It didn't even play up on a lot of Winnie the Pooh tropes, barely using Christopher Robin, and honestly just feeling like a guy in a mask that was attempting to be a Michael Myers ripoff. Happy that they got their money back enough to where they're gonna make a sequel with 10 times the budget, and you know what? Let's hope that's better than what this was. Number 6 on my list, Rebel Moon. Zack Snyder, I am always rooting for you, okay? Regardless whether you have scary fans or not, I like that Netflix is letting you do whatever you want in the original films category, but what Rebel Moon was such a disappointment. A movie that was supposed to be his version of Star Wars, going grand, big, creating a universe that would have spin-offs, a video game, multiple sequels, ended up getting completely ruined because they wanted to recreate the Snyder Cut event, and instead Snyder is working on a director's cut of this movie that is going to be an hour-long, rated R, not held back to the PG-13 rating, and all of that just really hurt what this first Rebel Moon movie was. I was honestly pretty sad walking out of this movie. Number 5 on my list, 65. Adam Driver, dinosaurs, sci-fi tech. This should have been an easy win of a movie, and yet it just didn't meet up to those expectations. I guess there's a reason Jurassic Park remains the only dinosaur movie out there and why we don't have dozens of them running, because it's not as easy to make a dinosaur film as interesting or fun like those. Number 4 on my list, Insidious 5. Man, I was so hyped to have Patrick Wilson returning not only as a director, but bringing back the original family of the first 2 Insidious movies. I thought we were about to get something great. But unfortunately, when I went to go see the movie, it was 70% recapping the events of the first 2 movies, and then 30% rushing through the new and exciting stuff I really wanted to see. The movie still managed to make a ton of money, so the Insidious franchise is nowhere near done, but hopefully wherever they go with the next one, they get a little bit more creative than this. Number 3 on my list, Exorcist Believer, man. I already had my doubts that Blumhouse could even revive the Exorcist franchise in a way that would warrant them paying $400 million for 3 sequels, but man, did this just turn out to be a generic mess of a movie. It started off kind of strong, and halfway through the film, I quite enjoyed it, but then when it forced this legacy sequel into it, it did nothing but ruin the connection to the original movies, really treated some legacy characters so disrespectful, and did not at all live up to the Exorcist name. Number 2 on my list, this one broke my heart, Indiana Jones 5, man. I am a big Indiana Jones guy. I love watching those movies as a kid with my dad, and I had a marathon watching the Indiana Jones movies leading up to Indiana Jones 5, and man, Dial of Destiny was just not it. I thought James Mangold would be a perfect fit to replace Steven Spielberg, but Dial of Destiny only reminded me that even if Steven Spielberg is behind the wheel of a bad movie, it is much more memorable and flashy than whatever Dial of Destiny was. I felt like this really ended the Indiana Jones story on a sad note, a lot of odd character decisions, and it just didn't even look or feel like an Indiana Jones movie. I tried convincing myself that I liked it, but no, it was just a disappointment for me. But number 1 most disappointing movie on my list, Expendables 4. Already, expectations are not that set high for an Expendables movie, but nowhere did I think I was gonna get DVD bargain bin quality from an Expendables franchise. This movie looks like it was part of a money laundering scheme that wherever the budget went, it was just to buy someone else's yacht and house, because wow, was it outstanding how much of a difference the quality of this movie was to the past 3. The twist involved with Sylvester Stallone's character in this movie is also laughable and so embarrassing from the franchise. This right here is bearing all classic action movies of the 80s, and maybe we just shouldn't try to recapture the magic of what was those movies. But again, those are just my opinions with the movies of 2023. Be on the lookout for the best comic book movies and the best horror movies I thought of this year, as well as giving me your list of these categories down below. I'm curious what you guys come up with. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at 3C Films or on TikTok at 3C Films. But as always, I'm Chris. Take care.